We have old people, young people, we have doctors, engineers, school teachers, just anything. It's just a broad cross-section. If there's any one thing that they might have in common, it's probably a sense of adventure.
There are so many things I can't control, but the things that I can. The Dick Polipnick Show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. I am your host, Dick Polipnick, and today we have a very special guest. Linda Chamberlain is the co-founder of Alcor. Linda, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dick. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So for the listeners who don't know who you are, though hopefully most of them do know at this point, can you tell them a little bit about what Alcor is?
Yes, Alcor is an organization that uses cryogenic temperatures, very, very low temperatures, like minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit, to slow down and stop the dying process for those people until future technologies can be developed to bring them back to healthy function. And my husband and I started Alcor Life Extension Foundation in 1972 for this purpose.
Awesome. So let's dive right into some of the technical details. So you had mentioned that it stops, or at least temporarily freezes, the dying process. So the patients, or the members, I should say, right? Members at Alcor, they haven't been declared dead yet, or are there some cases like dependent, like if a member was in a car accident and like you just get them in there as quickly as possible, or how does that work?
They do have to be pronounced legally dead for us to start our procedures. Since it's not reversible yet, it could be considered murder, and we don't want to go to jail. So we have to adhere to that law. But when you think about it, legal death means that your heart and your lungs can no longer function without intervention. It doesn't mean that the cells are dead. It doesn't mean that your organs are dead. If it did, we wouldn't be able to have heart transplants and liver transplants. So our patients are fundamentally alive at a cellular level, and our mission is to slow down and eventually stop the dying process. Now, we do like to be able to start that as soon as possible, because the moment your heart stops beating, your brain stops receiving oxygen, a whole cascade, a chemical cascade is set into place. Your body is programmed to basically lyse or fall apart, die, dust to dust, that sort of thing. And so that happens very quickly if intervention isn't there. But death is not an on-off switch. You're not just alive one moment and dead the next. So we do have time to work with, but time is of the essence. So just the moment one of our members, let me just make clear the definitions here. We're a nonprofit organization, so people who have made arrangements for this are called members of the organization. Once they are pronounced, then they become a patient. And we feel that the term patient is correct, since they're not really dead at a cellular level, and what we're trying to do is to stop death. Mm-hmm. So just the moment a member is pronounced and they transition to becoming a patient, we start a stabilization process, and once they're stabilized, then we go into the cryoprotection process. If you'd like, I can go through each one of those stages and tell you what's involved.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Well, first of all, once a person signs up with Alcor for this procedure, they have to provide the funding in advance so we can launch the moment we hear they're in trouble. And they have to sign a whole bunch of legal paperwork, and we can talk about that if you want to later. And at that point, we encourage them, should you ever need our services, try to come to Scottsdale, because we can give you our best procedures if that is the situation. So we offer our members up to $15,000 relocation fees to get them to Scottsdale to make this happen. And so the very best case is a member knows that they're dying, let's say, of cancer. And they contact us, and our medical response director helps them through the process of getting into hospice and then getting moved out here to Arizona and into hospice here. The purpose of that is that with that scenario, we can deploy all of our equipment in a team of members who are trained to do a standby at the bedside. And when we get to about, we are figuring it's probably 2 to 3 days, then our standby team will be there 24 hours with the member, so that the moment they are pronounced, we start our stabilization process, the slowing down of the dying process. So the first thing we do is we get them into an ice bath of crushed ice. They're on a bed of crushed ice, they're laid in it, and then they're covered with crushed ice. About 5 gallons of water go into the ice bath, and we have a recirculating system, a pump at their feet, which brings the water up to a mask over their face, so that ice water is flowing over their face and their carotid arteries to enhance the cooling process. Mm-hmm. Hypothermia is probably the single most important thing we can do in slowing down the dying process. Most people have read newspaper articles about a person who's fallen through the ice on a pond into icy water, and they are recovered several hours later and revived and go about their lives normally. Yeah. And it really does slow down the dying process. Hospitals use it more and more all the time for things like heart surgery, where they have to stop the heart and need 5 or 6 hours to do this surgery. They will cool the patient so that they're kept in better condition.
Right. You're just doing it on purpose because the situation is allowing you to be more successful, because you're able to do the operations while preserving the body in the most pristine condition as possible, right?
Exactly. Right. So the first thing we do is we get them into the ice bath. Then we start their heart and their lungs again. They're intubated. We begin ventilation, and a thumper, a mechanical cardiopulmonary support device, is on their chest so that their heart is mechanically beating again. And so now we've kind of reversed what was called legal death to begin with. And next, we have about 10 different medications that we introduce. We have to use the vasculature in order to do this. So we access the vasculature. The first medication is Propofol. Many people are familiar with this. Most people have had it used if they've had any kind of surgical procedure. It's an anesthetic, and it slows down the brain's metabolism demands. So if the brain is demanding less oxygen and support, we're helping to slow down the dying process. We have membrane stabilizers, we have antibiotics, we have vasopressors to keep the vasculature in good shape while we're using it. Once we get the patient stabilized like this, then they're moved to Alcor, about 5 minutes away from the hospice, and that's where we do the cryoprotection. So in this scenario, the patient is local. We bring them into the operating room, and the surgeons will cannulate the patient, meaning hook up tubes to their arteries so that we can have chemicals flowing through the patient. And the first thing we do once they're cannulated is we begin an open circuit washout, where the blood is washed out of the body and replaced with a very cold organ transplant solution. It's at about 3 degrees above zero, or 3 degrees Celsius. And we use the organ transplant solution for exactly the same reason that organ transplant teams perfuse their organs with this solution. It can keep the organ alive for 10 to 15 hours while they're getting the organ to the recipient. And so we use it for exactly the same reason. We're giving ourselves an extra 10 or 15 hours to get the patient down to liquid nitrogen temperature, where we stop the dying process completely. Liquid nitrogen is at minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit, very, very cold. And at that temperature, the atoms are not moving anymore. Well, a physicist might argue with, nitpicks about that a little bit.
Right.
But
right.
for our purposes, there's no enzyme action. There's nothing happening. The person can stay at that temperature for thousands of years without any further deterioration. So it's at that point that we consider that we have stopped the dying process.
Mm-hmm.
And so after we've done the open circuit washout with the organ preservation solution, we then go into closed circuit recirculation, and we begin to add our vitrification cryoprotection fluid. And vitrification this is a very important point. It's a physics term. It means that a liquid has gone below the ice point without crystallizing. So liquids, when they solidify, are either crystallized or vitrified. Vitrified means a glass-like state. And we've been able to do this for about the last 20 years. And so it means a tremendous decrease in the amount of damage that is being done when the person is taken to a solid state.
Sure.
And go ahead.
No, I'm just going with the story.
Oh, okay.
It's a
I
Minnesota thing.
Yeah. Okay. The perfusate, the liquid that's being perfused through the vasculature, is cryoprotective, so that when they reach the ice point, they won't crystallize. And that's very important. In the early days, we really did freeze our patients because that's the only thing we knew how to do. And so it's still, people talk about cryonics is freezing people. These days, cryonics is vitrifying people.
Got it.
Now, with the caveat that for any person who's over the age of 40, they will already have atherosclerosis, blockages in various capillaries and that sort of thing. So if there's a blockage somewhere and our cryoprotectant can't get past that blockage, then tissues that are beyond that blockage will crystallize. And that's just not something that we can control right now. We can't, go in and rotor-rooter them before we, so it's just one of those things that is a possible reason why the vitrification won't be perfect. Once now we have to, in introducing the cryoprotectant, we have to make sure that the patient is just a few degrees above freezing, their body core, just a few degrees above freezing before we introduce the cryoprotective agent, because it is toxic at room temperatures. And so there are two reasons why the organ transplant solution is introduced at 3 degrees Celsius. One is to get rid of the blood, which is no longer really helping as much as the organ transplant solution is. And number two, by perfusing this very cold liquid, we are crashing the body core temperature down very, very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And so once they've gotten, the body core is at about 3 degrees Celsius, we can then start introducing the cryoprotectant. And we have to do it very slowly. And the more concentrated the cryoprotectant is, the more viscous it becomes. So there would be the temptation to push it harder through the vasculature, but that would damage the vasculature. The human vasculature, even for a young person, can only take a pressure of about 90 millimeters of mercury. So this whole process, once we go on closed circuit and we start doing the cryoprotective perfusion, is controlled by a computer. Computers are just better at sorting lots and lots of details than humans are.
Right.
So it goes on computer control. The computer is measuring temperature, it's measuring the perfusate concentration, and it's measuring the pressure. And it looks at it and it makes sure that the pressure never goes above 90 millimeters of mercury and keeps it there. And it looks at the temperature and the concentration and decides how to make a very smooth graph showing the uptake of the cryoprotection until they're completely protected. Now, in the operating room, we have a screen, a large screen, which has all this data that the computer is collecting so that we can watch it. But human brains aren't very good at just streams of numbers, so it draws graphs. So the concentration of the perfusate graph, we want to see it go nicely this way. Temperatures, we want them to go very nicely this way. If there's anything that isn't perfect, then it tells us there's a problem. It might be something like a kinked tube, but the perfusionists have to figure out what's going wrong and correct that. Now, it can take about the first hour. It goes very fast because the cryoprotectant is very thin and watery, and it moves through the vasculature very quickly. As it continues to get more and more viscous, it slows down. We can't push harder, so we have to slow down. So it can take up to 8 to 12 hours to completely cryoprotect a patient before they are then taken into the patient care bay for the final step, which is to take them from about -3 degrees Celsius down all the way to -196 Celsius, which is liquid nitrogen. Mm-hmm. In Fahrenheit, that's -320 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is also done by computer control, so it's very smooth curve as it goes down. Once they reach that temperature, we let them equilibrate for several days. And then finally, once the cryoprotection is finished, they are placed into a canister, a cryo capsule. The engineering term is Dewar, named after the man who invented the giant thermos bottle, which is what it really is. They go into the giant thermos bottle, it's filled with liquid nitrogen, and they stay at that temperature then until we have a means of reviving them.
Right. And contrary to common belief, they actually go in the tubes head down, right?
They do. We no longer feel it's necessary, but it's kind of historical. Mm-hmm. And the reason we started doing it is because in the early days, we kept a log as to how much a given doer was using over time. We logged daily every single doer that we have since it was put into service. That way we can tell, is it using more than it needs, and historically it has used? If so, there might be a problem. And so over the first couple of decades, we had enough data that we found that it takes about 5 or 6 months for the nitrogen in a doer to fall all the way to the bottom. Mm-hmm. And so it would only be something like a puncture or something that would make that happen sooner. But in the early days, we put them head down in case there was a drop in the nitrogen. We didn't want their brain to be affected.
Right. So it was a safety precaution. Like in case it happens, this way the brain is preserved last. You know what I mean? Like it's the most protected piece. Got it.
Right. So I know that. Let's talk about some of the members' their desires when they want to be brought back, or the patients, I guess, now that they're in the cryonics. So I know that your unique status, from my understanding, is much different than most people. That you don't want to wait for a physical, biological body to come back. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I'm not interested in having a physical biological body. That will that right now is considered the default if a member has not given us any instructions about what their preferences are. It will simply be a biological body, and it will probably be rejuvenated to about 25 years of age. That seems to be a very popular age. But we do encourage our members to let us know what their preferences are. We make sure they understand we cannot promise that we can do what you want, but if we don't know, then of course it won't happen. So
Right.
it's helpful if we know what you are interested in. Not every one of our members does that. Probably just they figure, well, I just want the default, so why make a statement?
Right.
However, people can tell us what they want, and it's the kind of thing like we were talking about, the fact that I don't really want a biological body. It's very limited, it's easily damaged, and so I would really like something a lot more elegant, and
Right.
I think that will be possible. So my revival statement says, please bring me back with a body which is made of nanobots instead of biological cells. And the idea here is that a lot of people have heard about uploading a brain into a computer. But even so, not everybody's going to want to be in virtual reality or augmented reality all the time. So you're going to want to interact with the physical world. And in order to do so, I would rather have a body which is nanobots, or sometimes called a nanobot swarm, as opposed to biological cells. And the difference with a biological body, you have trillions of cells stuck together, and they work together, and they do the stuff that we recognize as our bodies. With a trillion nanobots, it could look just like you, so that no one would really know when they met you, are you biological or are you, nanobot swarm or something? Wouldn't be able to tell. But as long as your brain is not running on a biological platform, you're going to be able to think at least a million times faster. And that's just based on the physics that electricity moves through silicon a million times faster than it moves through biological tissues. So keeping with a biological body means that you'll always be slow. And so it doesn't appeal to me. Another reason is, an example I often give is, right now, if I want to go swimming in the ocean, I have to worry about sharks. But if I have a body made out of nanobots, I can reconfigure that body anytime I want. So I can temporarily turn myself into a killer whale, and then the sharks have to worry about me instead of the other way around.
Right. I love that. The first time I ever saw you, when I first heard about Alcor, was in, as you know, but this is for the viewers' knowledge, is in a documentary. And in the documentary, you had mentioned, you used the example of skiing on the moons of Jupiter, I believe, without the need for
Mars,
oxygen.
actually, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I just love that idea. Like, to me, I love skiing, I love space. I'm like, you can combine them? Oh my, sign me up,
So you can see yourself skiing on Olympus Mons in the red dust.
Yeah. Right, yeah, that sounds so fun.
There's no air, so you can't breathe. So a biological person would have to have a huge space suit and some and everything. But if you have a nanobot body, you can configure it so that you don't have to breathe oxygen while you're skiing.
Right. Yeah, that sounds fun. So, okay, so at this section, if it's okay with you, let's kind of dive into some of the potentials. And I know that there's not a lot of science backed on it right now, but I just want to get the audience excited about the future. So I know that you yourself have written a couple of novels about, one is called, is it Space Pebble, right?
Star Pebble. Got it.
And then, you and Fred compiled a series of short stories, also, correct?
A novel called Bio-Quagmire, which is very much, he goes further into the transforming yourself with nanotechnology and that sort of thing. My novel is more down to earth, so to speak. It's family living in a space colony, and the mother of the main character, mother and father, are cryopreserved, and they've been kidnapped. And so it's kind of a space action thing.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I haven't read it yet, but I bought it on Amazon. So it's
Yes.
just once I read it, I'll have to let you know what I thought, because I'm a huge
I hope you'll like
science
it.
fiction. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'll let you know. So let's talk about some of the other things that you might hear for the rejuvenation statement. So like there's the nanobots, right? So I've heard a lot of people call them like nanomites or like the nanobot swarm, like you're saying. There's people who want to come back just biologically. Like let's say that they just died of, old age and their heart just slowly stopped, right? That's probably an easier one. So I'm assuming they would probably be one of the first patients to be revived, because that's something that would probably get solved sooner, assuming that in addition to whatever they died from, they were able to reverse the cryonic process, right? So that way, if both of those were present, they can bring that patient back. So like other things would be like cancer, right? So like not only would you have to be able to reverse the cryonics, you'd also have to cure whatever cancer you died from. Otherwise, you're just a ticking time probably anyway, right?
And the third thing that they'll have to be able to do, you name two of them, of the three basic things that revival technologies will have to be able to do. The third one is to rejuvenate people who want to be brought along. Nobody wants to come back and still have cancer and be an old 90-year-old person.
Right.
So those three things are the base of what revival technologies will have to be able to do. And we assume, based on the progress of medical science, we assume that it's going to be someplace between 50 and 100 years before those technologies will be available.
So both the rejuvenation and the reverse cryonics?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, gotcha.
Actually, the rejuvenation will probably come along sooner. If you're reading anti-aging type stuff with CRISPR and with genome rewriting and all of these things that are happening today, they say that the average person will probably be able to afford rejuvenation technologies within the next 10 to 20 years.
That's great. Yeah. So I'm excited about that. I follow several influencers, including you, in the area, read some of your stuff. Mm-hmm. So one thing that we're actually doing a series on the show right now you're the first guest in the series, because I compiled a list of like, if I could talk to anybody about like, we're going to do a series on anti-aging and like immortality kind of things. And you were number one on the list, Linda. So
I'm flattered. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're talking to a couple other guests, and we're going to do a compilation. So it'll be really fun. I'll send that to you
Good.
when we're done
I'll
with
look
it.
forward to it.
Awesome. So let's dive into what people go through when they first hear about Alcor. I know that people even I've talked to about anti-aging, rejuvenation, like you're saying, being cryonically preserved, or even just being revived and like curing diseases. So I myself, just to give you some context, Linda, I have a chronic kidney disease. So I received a kidney transplant when I was still young, I think 2 years ago. So I'm doing great, but with the negative side effects, I'm super grateful for my donor. But the downside is that I have a high chance of the same disease recurring in the new kidney as I did my previous two, right? And I have to deal with the anti-rejection. So there's like those two huge risk factors. So there's things being built out there right now for artificial kidneys, right? So like we're talking plastics and special polymers that are allowing blood flow to go through them to filter different minerals, right? So let's kind of talk about what people, when they're first confronting, like coming into Alcor, what, like, obviously I'm thinking this from like a business side too. Do you have like an onboarding process? Do you have like a sales process? Or is it like you just solely work with the people that are like ready to sign? Like, how does that process work?
It's primarily we work with people who come to us, they're ready to sign. This business is very delicate. It would be very easy to be labeled frauds, charlatans. As a matter of fact, in the very early years, back in the 1970s and 1980s, when we were just starting out, we were labeled those things. We were called lunatic fringe. And so advertising is something we have to be very, very careful with.
Right.
Most of our promotion is doing podcasts and documentaries and those kinds of things to get the information out there. There is a new organization that is starting up in Florida right now. We're very concerned about because when we first heard about them, we went on their website and they had stolen our website. And
oh my gosh.
we got attorneys to make them take it down. But, you know, because of that, we've been a little bit cautious. And from what we can tell, they don't put a lot of time and money into building their technology. They spend most of their time and money calling seniors on the telephone at night to market cryonics to them. So that kind of thing really, really concerns us. And so mostly people hear about it, they come to us and want to find out more. We only have at this point, 47 years after we started Alcor in 1972, we have 1,247, 48 people who have made arrangements for this. By any normal business plan, Alcor should have gone out of business a long time ago. And so why have we not? And we're, of course, always looking at questions like that. I think that one of the major impediments to people becoming involved is that there's so much fraud in our culture. And so when you look at something where, well, wait a minute, you want me to pay you in advance so that you can cryopreserve me, and then I won't be conscious, I won't have any control. I won't, you know,
right.
People worry about it. And so one of our most difficult jobs is getting across to people that they can trust us. And it's not easy. Somebody calls you on the telephone to talk to you, or comes out for a tour. We have tours twice a week on Tuesday and Friday people can sign up for. But even so, they can only spend a couple of hours with us. How do they know we're not just putting on a show for them? And that's a very difficult thing. The best I think that we can do is reassure them that we are signed up for this ourselves. Not every Alcor employee is. It's not a requirement. Their competency is the main thing when we hire someone. But most of our employees are signed up for this. I'm signed up for this. I have 3 family members who are in stasis in the patient care bay just down the hall.
And just for the audience to know that, so the 3 patients that Linda's referring to is her husband and co-founder, Fred. He died, was it just recently, right?
Yes, it was in 2012. And his father was Alcor's first patient, and part of the reason we started Alcor. He was cryopreserved in 1976, and my mother was cryopreserved in 1990. So, and I have dozens of very, very good friends who are in the patient care bay. So this is a personal thing. This is not just we make plastic toys, and but the ethics of our organization and the way we do things and the safety, we depend on that for ourselves as well as our loved ones. And we don't do different procedures for different people. My mother doesn't get a different procedure than somebody that I don't know. And so the other thing that we try to get across to people is that because this is a very personal thing for us, one of our early concerns was, how are we going to reanimate people, and how can we know how much it's going to cost? How can we provide the funding for that? Alcor is the only organization that I know of that offers to pay for your revival as well as your cryopreservation. All the other organizations basically say, well, we assume that people in the future will find this so exciting and they will want to bring those people back, and so they will be happy to pay for bringing them back.
Hopefully.
Those of us in Alcor just don't like leaving things to the goodwill of other people. So the solution we came up with about 10 years ago, after many years of legal work and everything, we came up with the Patient Care Trust. And the purpose of the Patient Care Trust is to take care of any expenses of long-term care and to pay for revival. And so how do we fund that? Today it's worth about $16 million. It's not huge by today's standards, but it's a pretty good start for 166 patients that we have right now. So how it works is this, which will also get us into the subject of how do we fund this. A person can choose to either be a whole body patient or they can choose to be a neuro patient. Whole body costs $200,000. Neuro is $80,000. Storage for a neuro is much less than storage for a whole body. So the procedures are the same. So when we cryopreserve a patient, half of their funding, let's say it's a whole body, $200,000, half of that goes towards getting them cryopreserved in the best way possible, the highest technology we can afford to make available. The other $100,000 goes into the Patient Care Trust so that they will have funds for long-term care and eventual revival. Now, the Patient Care Trust, only Alcor has this mechanism. It has its own board of directors, which is separate from the Alcor board of directors, so that we can guarantee their motivation. We don't want Alcor saying, gee, you know, we need some newer equipment over here for getting people cryopreserved. Right. So let's go steal it from the Patient Care Trust. We don't want that. They have to take care of that part of it. Patient Care Trust takes care of its part of it. So it has its own board of directors. 2/3 of the directors on the Patient Care Trust have to have a loved one in stasis. So we know what their motivation is. Their motivation is to pay close attention and make sure things are done right and those patients are protected. That is something which is only Alcor does. And we try to get these kinds of ideas across to people when they're looking at us and deciding whether or not they can trust us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did not know about the trust. But it makes sense on a business level and from a management level of like somebody, like who knows, let's say that one patient's unique situation might be much more difficult to, reanimate or rejuvenate than other patients. So they'll just logically have a larger expenses because they're going to be cryopreserved for a longer period of time, right? You have to keep that circulation. You have to keep it plugged in per se, right? You have to make sure the equipment's updated and who knows? I mean, the organization is only, 50 years old at this point, right? So if in another 50 years, some of the equipment needs to be, might actually have to be replaced, right? Let's say,
It's constantly being improved and updated. Yeah.
right. So like I know your father-in-law, Fred's father, he was the first ever neural cryonic preservation, correct?
Yes.
That's amazing. So for him, like since that was like and Alcor's first patient, so in his case, like has his cryopreserved now is it just the brain or is it the whole head?
It's the whole head. It's all of the biological structures down to about the clavicles.
Okay.
And that's called a cephalon in medical terms. So it's all of the structures. And there are a couple of reasons we do that. One is that if we were to remove the brain surgically, it's very easy to damage it. It's a very delicate structure. It'd be so easy to damage it. And then we would have to find some way of protecting it. And what better than the custom-made cranium?
Right. It's custom fit. It's gonna work great. It'll be nice and snug. Yeah.
It'll be perfect. And so we just do the entire cephalon for that reason. Yeah.
So for your father-in-law, as technology has advanced, or perhaps as equipment needs replacement, has his cryopreservation moved from like one machine to another over time, or is he still in the same tank per se? For the last 50 years.
Yes, he's in the same doer. Once the patient is in liquid nitrogen, they stay there. What will change will be the revival technology that will need to be used. Now, some people think that revival technologies will be so robust that it will be just as easy to revive a patient who was frozen with massive destruction as it will be to revive a patient who had the very best cryopreservation possible, where they're practically in a revivable state.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know because those technologies aren't here yet.
Yeah, we're not there.
Yeah, we're not there. And so we just don't know yet. It won't be first in, first out, obviously, because unless revival technologies are so magical they can do anything,
Right.
It's much more likely that people who had good cryoprotection will be the first patients to be returned to healthy function. And like any medical technology, it's limited initially and it gets better and better and better. So there will probably be a time difference between people that are in excellent condition and people who are not. Who's not in excellent condition? Well, my father-in-law, because he was the first we did, and it was very rudimentary compared to what we can do today. But there are even worse cases. If a member lives alone in the city of New York, they die of a heart attack, no one finds them for a week. Obviously, there's been massive damage there.
Oh, right. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Yeah. We had one case where an individual lived in the Midwest. His family did not like his plans to be cryoprotected. So when he became demented, they had themselves named as his power of attorney. When he died, they did not let us know. A year later, they called and they said, well, you weren't able to cryopreserve our family member. We want his money back. In addition to having our members tell us their preferences for things like revival, a set of other questions that they can give us directions on in their paperwork. One of them is, what do you want done with your funding if we're not able to cryoprotect you? Maybe they're on an airplane that went down in the ocean. They never found the airplane.
Right.
Then what do you want us to do with your funding? And, they can say, give it to my cat, give it to my estate, give it to these relatives, whatever they want. They can tell us what they want us to do. They can also tell us what they want us to do if the circumstances of their death are not optimum. And some people say, you know, if I can't have a really good cryoprotection, don't cryopreserve me, return the funding to these people.
Right. So the examples you're thinking of are like if there was like significant brain damage, or if they were like in a car accident and like the body would be it would be very extreme to try to.
Very extreme. In this case,
Right.
I was telling you about in the Midwest, where they
Right. It would
purposely
have been a year.
they buried him. He was buried for a year. They wanted the money back. We looked at his paperwork and we said, we can't give you the money back because number one, he said that if we weren't able to cryopreserve him, that he wanted the money to go to the Alcor Research Fund. And they said, okay, then we'll see you in court. And we said, okay. We went to court. The judge ruled in our favor. A contract is a contract.
Right.
And ruled further, even further, that his wishes, if his circumstances were not perfect, what would he want done? Would he still want to be cryopreserved, forget it, or whatever? His preference was cryopreserve any portion of my brain you can find. So the judge ruled that he would be exhumed and Alcor could cryopreserve his brain. And so we're very happy about that. We've had about 3 or 4 challenges like that. We've won all of them so far, and that's a very good case precedent to protect our patients and their desires.
I think that's really important for you guys as an organization, which I admire, right? Compared to like we were talking earlier about the bad reps that are out there, right? Giving cryonics a bad name. So that's one thing that I really admire about Alcor is you guys really do put like members first, right? And if that's their intentions, that's what you do, right? And I could just, I fantasize almost about, let's say, 200 years from now when Alcor is irrelevant because number one, death or anti-aging is possible, and death is no longer, it's eradicated, right? So that way you don't need new members coming in, and you're able to bring back all of your existing patients. That you guys would, once every how many years you would have a little Alcor reunion. Do you remember back in the day when we all, yeah, that'll be interesting. It's because it's a very solid organization. So
that's another thing we try to point out to people when we're trying to help them decide if they can trust us is Alcor is a nonprofit organization. Primarily, well, not primarily, there are a couple of reasons. One, we have to be nonprofit in order to use the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act to take possession of our patients. But even more importantly, Alcor does not want to have our mission, our procedures, our protocols, anything that we do determined by shareholders who are trying to maximize their profits. It's got to be about what's best for the patients. And the only way we can make sure that we can do that is to be nonprofit so that we can call shots.
Yeah, I love that. That's brilliant. So let's talk about your mother. She was a great example of probably someone that was in a very, like almost like a best case scenario cryopreserve, right? Because she was able to, or you were as a family were able to kind of plan ahead of time because for the viewers, it was it cancer or what was it?
Yes, she had lung cancer.
So she was able to go on a diet that, in the time leading up to, her cryopreservation that optimized her body for the cryopreservation to take place, correct?
No, not correct. It wasn't optimizing her biological body. She died in 1990. This was prior to death with dignity type laws. We now have 8 different states in this country that will allow you to do physician-assisted suicide. And all of Canada is now adopted those kinds of laws. But in my mother's day, none of this was available. She was in pain. She felt that her quality of life was not such that she really wanted to just continue to live. And so she was asking, what could she do? And I explained to her that if she were to do something like overdose on her morphine or something like that, that's considered suicide. It's against the law. She would be autopsied. And this would be very bad for somebody who wants to be cryopreserved. Mm-hmm. So the only real option that she had in those days, and one which is still available to people today, my husband used this as well, is to dehydrate, meaning not taking any food or water. That is a right that you have. You can refuse your medications, you can refuse operations. If you are very ill, you can refuse to take food and water, and within 7 to 10 days, you will die a natural death. And that's what she chose to do. It's not painful. She was a home hospice patient. We were there with her. They were able to give her a sufficient amount of morphine so that she was not suffering. And my husband did the same thing. He was in hospice here in Scottsdale, but he didn't want to wait 7 to 10, he didn't want to wait months while his body was gradually dying and deteriorating from his cancer. So he elected to dehydrate also, which meant that painlessly within 7 to 10 days, he was able to be pronounced legally dead, and we could start our procedures.
Got it. So Linda, where did you and Fred get the inspiration to start Alcor? Like, did you guys have prior experience at a past organization that did something similar, or were you scientists in the field, or what led you to it?
We weren't scientists in the field. He was an engineer, a NASA engineer at Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. I was an office worker. We hadn't met each other yet. I read a book by Robert Ettinger, who's considered to be the father of cryonics. He was a physics teacher in Detroit, Michigan, and he wrote a book called The Prospect of Immortality. And he laid out this idea that technology should be able to solve the age-old problem of everybody dies. And being an atheist, I thought, wow, I just pretty much accepted I'm going to die, I'm going to return to dust, I'm going to be gone, my cats won't remember me anymore, And then here suddenly is this exciting idea, maybe I don't have to die. And so I wrote Robert Ettinger a letter and asked him, is there anything going on in California, which is where I lived? And he responded and said, there's a small group of people who are interested, and you might want to contact them and see what's going on. So I called this group, and they were actively trying to put together the second National Cryonics Conference. Robert Ettinger had held the first National Cryonics Conference in 1969, and this was this was in 1968. This is in 1969, and this little group of people were trying to promote and put together the second Cryonics Conference in San Francisco in 1970. So I thought, well, that sounds kind of cool. I'll see what I can, get involved. As it so happens, Fred Chamberlain had a very similar, almost an exact story of how he found out about it. He was there when I went to, this little group to see what I could do to help with the conference. So that's how we met and fell in love, and we were Alcor's first love story.
So when you say first, that means there's more.
Oh yes, there have been other love stories over the years of people who've met through Alcor and become involved together and that sort of thing. So we got involved. Like I said, we fell in love. We got married, and his father was ill. He'd had a couple of heart attacks, a couple of strokes. He had diabetes, lots of different problems. He just didn't have long. We figured a couple of years at the most. So we were trying to get this little group to improve the technology. It had a rudimentary capability, but they were basically using mortuary science. You had to go to the mortuary, the mortician did everything. And Fred, being an engineer, this just really bothered him. This shouldn't be. This should be a medical.
There's better ways.
Yeah, and just the equipment. If you use a mortician's embalming pump, no matter how many times you try to clean it, it's got rubber tubes and things that are going to hold on to some of the formaldehyde, and that's not going to be good when it gets into your system. Mm-hmm. So he decided that he wanted to develop specific equipment, specialized equipment that we could use. And that was the engineer in him. We knew from the beginning that, I'm getting ahead. So we decided, well, okay, if this little group doesn't really want to do this, I guess we'll just have to do it ourselves. So a couple of young cockeyed kids, he was in his mid-30s, I was in my mid-20s. If we had known then what it was going to take, we might have chickened out and decided to go camping instead, or something. But we were very dedicated to having a capability before his father really needed it. We worked very hard. He decided, I've got a good paying job at JPL. Why don't you quit, work full time at building Alcor, and I'll, support us. His father left us about $50,000, so that was our big nest egg, what we had to work with. And so we started building Alcor. We never saw ourselves as the people to head up Alcor forever. We just didn't feel that we were qualified. We were just enthusiastic. And so we always saw it as our job is to build Alcor to the place where it can attract the MDs and the PhDs that it needs to be a really strong, good, ethical company that can cryopreserve people and then revive them. So I'm like the proud grandmother. Would you like to see pictures of my grandchildren? These are the doers, and
yeah.
And here's our doctors and our researchers, and so I'm just the proud grandmother. I'm very proud of what Alcor has become.
Yeah, absolutely. So how many people do you have on staff that you're the grandmother of right now?
Let's see. There are 9 people on staff right now. We've got Dr. Max Moore, who's our CEO. We have a chemist. We have an engineer who's our main fix-it guy, invent it and fix-it guy. We have our medical response director who takes the team out to rescue people if they can't come to Scottsdale. Our office manager, her assistant, our medical, our membership director, and me. So I left somebody out. I'm sure there's at least there's one other person. I'm not sure who I forgot. Oh, our patient care manager, that would be number 8. So it's small, much smaller than you would expect. But that's just the employees that are here in Scottsdale. We have a very large and very active board of directors, and we have a board of directors for the Patient Care Trust, and we have a large list of board advisors, people who live all over the country, but we get together on Zoom and have meetings and that sort of thing. So technology has made it possible for us to have an extended family, an extended group of people who work to make Alcor work.
Sure, that's fantastic. So this is for the audience members that are really interested in Alcor. What do you recommend for the people who are interested in Alcor specifically, what do you recommend they do to like investigate more or follow up or get in touch with you?
Go on our website, alcor.org. It's huge. You can find anything you want to know there. We believe in transparency, so we have our protocols there. We have everything there. And so that would be a good place to start, to familiarize with our capabilities and where we are. And then come visit us. Like I said, we have tours every Tuesday and Friday, and you can sign up for those tours on the website, and then come out and talk to us and find out more about what it would take.
Sure. So here's another question for you. So do patients or potential members, do they ever fear of, what if I'm in a situation where it would be 1,000 years before I can be brought back in the state that I want? Do you have like a clause in the contract that says, after X amount of years, if it's past this point, I don't want to be brought back anymore because I feel like I would be too out of place. I would be like in this whole other world where they might not speak English anymore, and I just, you know what I mean? Like, do you have any conversations like that? Does that ever get brought up?
We do have what we call a statement of revival preferences, and it's a place where I wrote it, and I tried to put it in the form of questions, because so many members that I talked to about this kind of an issue would say something like, I don't have a clue what the future is going to be like. I don't have an idea as to what revival might be like. So I don't know what to tell you my preferences are. So I tried to put together the revival preferences statement in the form of questions to help people begin to think about potential revival. And then in addition to the specific things, there's lots of other places. Okay, if there's anything else that hasn't been covered in the form, if there's any other issues that concern you, anything, here's a place where you can write them. So we can't know what every person would be concerned with, but we give them an opportunity to let us know. And that's also why we have in the regular contract the opportunity for our members to tell us, what do you want us to do if you don't have an optimum cryopreservation? Do you want us to go ahead anyway? Do you want us to then just terminate it and return the funding to someone? Because there's no way for us to know in advance what any given person's circumstances.
Right. So it's not necessarily a concern for culture fit in the future. It's more of a concern for how and when their preference would be for rejuvenation, correct?
It's all of those things. Some people worry about, what will the world be like? Will it be a world I want to live in?
Right.
I think that most people, well, let me back up a little bit. I'm often asked, what kind of people sign up to be cryopreserved for the future? And we have people from every walk of life. We have old people, young people, we have doctors, engineers, school teachers, just anything. It's just a broad cross section. If there's any one thing that they might have in common, it's probably a sense of adventure. If a person doesn't have a sense of adventure, then they're probably going to be more concerned about, but what if the world is not a place where I want to be? And when I'm asked those things, I have to tell people, well, basically I'm a glass half full kind of gal. So I'm an optimist, and I look at it, if I don't go there, then I gave up and I never found out if it was a world I wanted to live in. If I go there and it's not a world I want to live in, then I have an option. I can commit suicide.
Right.
I'm not forced to stay there. So, and maybe Alcor will even have an opportunity for people to go back into stasis. You know? I don't know.
Right.
But to me,
Yeah, why
having
don't you put me back in the oven for another 100 years? This is boring. Call
right,
me when there's
yeah.
when I can surf on Mars. Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, I think that if a person doesn't have a sense of adventure, they probably are not going to be interested in this. They're going to be too concerned about what could go wrong. And I can tell you there have been many conversations I've been involved with when it was, you know, it's almost like that thing about little kids who are like 2 or 3 years old. Why? But why? But why? And it's this, you know, infinite why game. And sometimes when I'm talking to people, it's, but what if this lifeboat situation? And what if this lifeboat situation? And all I can say is that we can't control everything. We just can't. I can't control everything in my life. Alcor can't control everything about the future to make it perfect, because there's no one perfect future for every one of our members, for one thing. But so, you know, it's a risk. It's definitely a risk. And people who are adverse to risk and change won't be interested in partaking of this particular option for them.
Right. So for the listeners that are adventurous and they want to look into life extension technologies, we already talked about if they're interested in Alcor to go to your website, alcor.org. But the people who are adventurous, who want to learn more about the cryonics that are being developed. So do you guys do a lot of the cryonic development, or are there other organizations or individuals who are like advancing the technology, or like you said, you have an engineer who like invents new procedures on your team? Like who are the industry leaders like advancing this technology right now?
Most of the advances in technology right now are scientists in the field of cryobiology. And our invented fix-it guy is always coming up with new equipment to make our procedures, to deliver our procedures in a better way. As far as improving the actual cryoprotection itself, that has to come from research, most of which is being done in cryobiology, and usually it's centered on organ banking. Right now is the big thing. Most cryobiologists who are doing things that are really important for us are working on organ banking. It's a huge industry for organs, organ replacement, and astonishingly, the largest number of people who don't, how to say this, back up a little bit. It's not just a matter of a person donates their organ, the organ is taken and given to a recipient. They have to go through all kinds of tests to make sure that this organ, that the recipient won't reject it. I'm talking to somebody who knows this. And so a huge number of people who are waiting for an organ never receive it, because a huge number of the organs, they can't find the recipient in time. So cryobiologists right now are very concerned with, can we cryopreserve organs and bank them? Like we take blood, preserve it and bank it so that it's all typed, and a person comes along and needs a certain kind of blood, they just go to the bank and get what they need and give it to them. So it eliminates all of this last minute tissue typing and the various things that they go through. So while they're
panic, right?
Yeah. And so there's a tremendous amount of focus on being able to cryopreserve organs for banking. And that research is producing a lot of very good results. I can talk about some of the research that's come out of that if you'd like. But that's the stuff that's pushing our ability to have better and better protocols, bringing people closer and closer to our goal of making what we do reversible suspended animation, just like in the movies. We're not there yet, but we are definitely always pushing toward that goal.
Right. So for some of the movies that you're referring to are even like Star Wars, when Han Solo is frozen in carbonite. Right?
Carbonite, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's never been quite that bad, but they did actually revive him in the end. Yeah, I'm always amused by these movies that they flash freeze, the soldiers with their guns in their hands.
Yeah, instantly, no problems. Yeah. Well, they can be thought out with the hairdryer later, So.
Exactly. Yeah. But
so talk about a little bit about just briefly on some of the advances that are coming up that you're excited about, both that you've been implementing recently and the ones that you see on the near horizon that you're going to be able to do the next 5-10 years.
Almost everything up until now for us has been proof of concept. Back in 1972, the best we could give people was, there's a proof of concept here. You can take eggs and sperm and freeze them, put them together in a petri dish, and you get a zygote, and it grows into a healthy human. So it's possible to cryopreserve biological tissues.
Mm-hmm.
The big problem is mass. It's very easy to control an experiment on a very small thing like an egg or a sperm. It's not so easy on something the size of a human body, even a human cephalon. The larger the mass, the more difficult it is to control all of the variables. And so things go wrong. And so we were very excited when we could take C. elegans, a very small worm, and it could be cryopreserved and brought back, but it's microscopic again. It's very, very small.
But that's an entire living organism versus...
They're living organisms, right, that could be cryopreserved and brought back because of...
So when was that? When was that done?
Oh, they've been doing that forever. Lots and lots and lots of different experiments in different places. It's
okay, got it.
As far back as the 80s and 90s. A really important advancement beyond that was learning to vitrify tissues. Right. And one of these researchers in cryobiology was the first person who learned how to vitrify a kidney. And there are some great pictures of a vitrified kidney next to a frozen kidney, and the frozen kidney looks all white and icy and everything. And the vitrified kidney just looks like a fresh, warm kidney sitting there, but it's solid. And then after...
glass-like steak that you were talking about earlier.
Glass-like steak, yeah, which means no crystallization, so you don't have the damage which is caused by the crystals. And then the same researcher, because of vitrification, wanted to see if he could vitrify a kidney and rewarm it and have it function. Well, he knew a human kidney was too large for the first step. So he went for a rabbit kidney, which is about the size of my thumbnail. Okay. Took the rabbit, removed both of its kidneys, vitrified a kidney, rewarmed it, put it back in the rabbit, and the rabbit survived. Wow. So it's proof of concept. Now, the rabbit was not, he was sacrificed because he wasn't perfect. They didn't want him to suffer. But it was a proof of concept that the kidney, with a lot more work, could probably get to the place where the rabbits could come back and be happy rabbits. But it was a proof of concept again, so it wasn't something they did lots of. More importantly, there's another C. elegans experiment that was done about 5 years ago that the researcher wanted to know, well, are we preserving memory when we cryopreserve a brain? Mm-hmm. And the assumption is that our memories are they are material. They are the connections in our brain of our dendrites and all of the stuff that goes together in the brain. All of that's physical. If that is well preserved, then the memories will be preserved. But as a proof of concept, a researcher decided to take about 100 C. elegans, these little tiny microscopic worms, and put them in a petri dish and train them where their food would be. So once they all had learned where to go to find their food, they were vitrified, they were rewarmed, and the majority of them still remembered where to go to get their food. One other fun little thing was that one of those little worms was pregnant when she was vitrified. When she was brought back, she went ahead and gave birth to her babies. So,
Oh, wow. So
that's a very nice proof of concept.
right.
More recently, see if I can think of something else. Those are the real highlights. Just as with trying to control the variables on a given organ, takes years and years and years of research to be able to get breakthroughs. That's still kind of where we are. And that's one reason why in our paperwork, one of the documents that people have to sign is called informed consent. It's about 10 pages long. We tell them everything that could possibly go wrong. It's kind of like when you go into the hospital for surgery and they tell you everything that can go wrong with your surgery. We want to make sure that people understand that this is not a guaranteed process. If they're doing it with the understanding of the risks. So, yeah.
Right. Got it. So to kind of end the interview on a good note. So what is one thing that people can look forward to in the future? Get them excited about it. What adventurous people, what do they want to look for?
Well, it's so hard for us in these biological brains, which are very analog, to step outside of our little analog box and be able to predict what the future is going to be. But with nanotechnology, the technological advances will just be, like today, everybody is used to having one body. In the future, we'll undoubtedly have multiple instantiations. Some of them might be human, some of them might not be. And people ask, well, why would I want to have more than one of me? Have you ever had a situation where you really wanted to go to that conference? It was going to be so good, but you're already signed up for that conference and you wanted to go to it too. Well, if I could have multiple instantiations, I'm not limited to what I can do with just one of me doing it. And of course, all of your instantiations will be able to communicate with each other. So it would be like at all times, my experience is I'm at both conferences and I know what's going on. Maybe, there's lots of more than two. Everybody will have to decide for themselves. That's just one possibility. If you can think a million times faster, just think how much more productive you'll be able to be, how many more books you'll be able to read, how many more, anything you like to do, how much more of that will you be able to do? Are there things that you want to do that you just haven't gotten to yet because you didn't have time? You won't have that experience anymore. I expect that the future will be a better place based on the fact that if you take the last 10,000 years of human recorded history, it's always been better. A jagged line, not a straight line, but it's always been better. And that's directly tied to technology. Life got better for cavemen when they discovered fire. Life got better when they discovered they could use bones to dig holes and do things. Technology has always made life easier and better. And so I just, I understand that it could go very bad, it could go very wrong, but I don't think that the probabilities lie in the direction of future being bad. I think it lies in the direction of future being really exciting.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Well, Linda, thank you for being on the show. Is there any asks that you want to ask of the audience?
Please come look at our website, see if it's for you.
Linda, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. It was an absolute pleasure, and
it was my pleasure
to know you. It was fantastic. It's like meeting one of my heroes. So I'm a huge fan. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
I hope you become a member and you'll join us in the future.
That's right. I got to get some capital, but I will be there.
Okay.